Over the next 3 days, our small caravan covered 1,000 miles along a desert road that was mostly paved in the easy part of the trip. And what a desert. Finally, sculpted dunes and daring sand formations hour after hour, mile after mile. The dunes' elegance, grace, and voluptuousness bore down on us. The monotonous beauty wore down my ordinary way of looking at the world, molded by the wind's harsh caresses into daring waves no sculptor or engineer could dream of duplicating. The dunes began to remind me of the sensuous curves and swooping arcs of Tabitha's body. Early in December, we reached Tamanrasset, the fabled jumping off city of the northern edge of the roughest part of the desert, named after the famous beautiful woman. It was the geographical center of the Sahara. Tamanrasset is one of my favorite towns, a jumble of Land Rovers, mud houses, and hardened desert travelers. We stayed here several days to rest, even though it was newly built, clean, and active. Go to one of the streets, along with donkeys, camels were packed outside modern houses. The supermarket offered mainly canned food, peaches, and meat. Most of the locals were extraordinarily in appearance and with stately turbans and white robes. From time to time, the Tuareg, the nomadic blue robed Berbers of the Sahara, sailed through on camels. These tribes people went back and forth across the border between Niger and Algeria, not recording any additional boundaries and proving the absurdity of having borders in the middle of the desert. Originally, Tamanrasset had been the outpost of the French Foreign Legion in 1950. It had 30 people, but now it had 30,000, a real boomtown. And it was a major crossroads for the long distance. African travelers, everybody traveling on the continent, was either here, had just been here, or was due to arrive. Camaraderie sprang up between the travelers as we shared maps and travel stories. Watch out for the owner of the antelope in Nigeria. Stay away from the Moon Inn in Zimbabwe. This road here is washed out. Take the route through the mountains. The hotel bar was a good place to hang out, one of the few in Tam where you could get a cold beer, or as close to cold as you could find in an Islamic desert. Pierre joined us with a Malayan woman he had picked up at the campground. We swapped tips with Makoto Yamamoto, a Japanese who had spent 11 months traveling around Africa. Another Japanese we met had been a student in Africa for 2 years and was now visiting as many African countries as he could pack in. We met single hitchhikers and bicyclists, as well as couples from Parisian society in designer clothes and designer Land Rovers who had bought along designer meals from Dars back in Munich. The main street of Tam was lined with 2 rows of rough and ready restaurants, each with a few battered tables outside and inside, and surrounded by vendors selling chicken on rotisseries. The travelers gathered at these cafes and table hopped, asking questions and gathering information in a swaggering yet egalitarian spirit. Parked out front like horses in the Old West were trail bikes, Japanese bikes, Toyotas, Land Rovers, festooned with sand ladders and bull catchers. Shovels were bolted on, and strapped on the top were sleeping bags, camping equipment, and steel boxes of clothes. Every vehicle carried a plentiful number of green and gray jerry cans loaded with gas and water, as well as extra tires. The talk in the street cafes came to center on 3 topics: border officials, bribes, and risks presented by crossing the Sahara. Due to breakdowns and the lack of fuel, dozens of Europeans and Africans die every year in the desert. A year before, a French family's Land Rover off the main route had broken down halfway to Arlit. For days, the mother had kept a diary of her husband, and her 2 small children's battle against the heat, hunger, thirst, and despair as they waited in vain for help to come. Her diary ended with the faint scrawl of a plea for help, reflecting her and her family's fatal debilitation. A few months before, a caravan of 5 cars and 10 people had set out along the same route. As happens easily in the Sahara, where there are no roads but only the crudest of trails across hundreds of miles of rock and dunes, they too had become lost. One car had broken down, and its occupants had piled into the other 4. One by one, 3 of the cars broke down or ran out of gas until the 10 travelers all rode in the last car. Then it broke down under the strain, and the 10 perished under the desert sun as they waited for help. Story after story like this made us sober about the dangers we faced. Obviously, we should stay on the main route as at all costs, a feat we were told repeatedly wasn't easy because of the lack of true roads. In other conversations, the travelers identified for us and each other those borders guards who would help and those we had to bribe, and told horror stories about travelers caught with contraband. Desperate for hard currency, Algeria, like many African countries, had strict exchange controls, insisting that travelers exchange all their hard currency for the country's worthless dinar. No traveler could afford to change all his money 10 to 15 times as he passed through successive African countries. Not only would he lose money as the local currencies depreciated and as he paid the money changer fees, but he wouldn't be able to exchange some currency at all. Outside Algeria, nobody wanted its dinars, and there were no banks at the southern end of the country. Thus, all the travelers crossing the continent were forced to become smugglers. Finding this undeclared currency was an important source of revenue for the country or for the border guards who had made big efforts to discover travelers' secret stashes. Frequently, in addition to confiscating the stash, they found the smuggler 2 or 3 times as much as they found. All this led to much talking among Tam's Cafe Society about the best place to hide contraband, where on your person and where on your vehicle. The only thing Tabitha and I ever worried about hiding was money, because we didn't carry any drugs or other contraband. I wore a money belt, which to my delight was never discovered by any border guard on our entire trip. One of our motorcycles had mud splattered maneuvering underneath the seat in a filthy, dusty pocket. We hid the money between its pages because it was too grubby to examine. In the frame under my gas can, there was a hollow pipe which we slipped money. The adventurousness of the travelers in Tams astonished us. We met 2 Amsterdam school teachers who had taken a year or 2 off to travel Africa. A New Zealander was making his way by ground back to New Zealand from London. There were 3 million people in New Zealand, he said, and 70,000 of them, or 2 or 3% of the population, were in the United Kingdom at any time. But traveling through Africa, I never saw any other Americans except for one missionary family. Tamanrasset was the last town on the paved road, so we had to check out with the Customs and Immigration's office. Here we had our passports, carnets, and currency declarations stamped for exit. Our mini caravan of 2 motorcycles and a truck pushed off into the desert in the Sahara proper. We asked our way out of town as there was no signpost. Up to Tam, the roads had been good, 2-lane blacktop in fair repair. As we knew from the other travelers, however, from here on south, the road stopped and turned into a nightmare of sand. 31 miles out of town, the pavement indeed petered out, and we hit sand, hundreds of miles of it in every direction. Just like in the movies, we dipped into a ravine and started a descent from 4,500 feet. Because the desert is flat and open, a traveler can make his route anywhere. The route we followed was a band of truck tracks, perhaps 2 miles wide. If a sandstorm had hit, the tracks would have been blown away, and we would have to use compasses to navigate the empty sea of sand. For a quarter of an hour, I suffocated on Tabitha's billowing cloud of dust and then called a huddle. Because of the dust, we would stretch out, Tabitha in front, me a half mile or so behind, and a quarter mile behind the right, Pierre several miles further back. The terrain became more desert-like the further we moved into the Sahara. Dunes of sand and scrubby rock rose on both sides. The way was overblown with sand, threatening to throw us over and preventing any speed. Sometimes road markers, 55-gallon drums, or tall poles stuck in the sand showed us the way. Where the sand, hey babe, 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 of course I didn't answer my phone for you when I'm available. What do you mean? Babe, what do you, babe, I'm available for you. Why wouldn't I answer? Huh? I was I was working, babe. I was I was carrying a cooler that the kitchen. Yes, I was carrying a cooler that the kitchen. Uh, I was helping the maintenance man. That's why. Yeah, the maintenance man at the restaurant. Like he's on site, so whenever air conditioning, coolers, vents don't work, table breaks, he's there to fix stuff. And so he just needed my help with the cooler. So I was there to help him today. Yes, babe. I'm there to help. There to help. I just huh? Mm. What's going on? It's you. It's not you. This not. You welcome. Huh? I'm gonna see. I miss you too. I miss you too. Yes, you look so good. You look so good. I'm gonna see you tonight. I'm gonna see you tonight. I'm gonna see you tonight. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna see you in like 4 hours, 5 hours. I am so excited to see you. All right. I'll see you in a few. All right, babe. Bye. Sometimes road markers, 55 gallons drums, or tall poles stuck in the sand showed us the way. Where the sand hadn't covered them, Tabitha followed tire tracks. We hoped whomever she was following knew where she was going, that we weren't following bandits, smugglers, or someone who himself was lost. As perhaps 50 tracks moved back and forth in front of her, she stuck to those more heavily traveled. Every 3 or 4 hours, a truck, perhaps a mile or so a distance, passed headed north on or one overtook us, heading our way but never getting close, making us again wonder if we were on the main route. If in fact there was such a thing, the trucks always made us feel better, that we were more or less in the right place. But shortly after they disappeared, doubt would creep in. The clusters of burned out wrecks of cars we came upon made us feel better too, indicating that we were probably on the main route as spare parts were in great demand. These were completely stripped.